Here today, so thank you. So I'd like to call this meeting to order. And we can start with any changes to the agenda. Does anyone have anything they want to change on the agenda?
There's no changes, but we do need to call roll.
Oh, we'll make roll call. Absolutely, we can call roll. Maya?
Mayor Brown,
Here.
Councilmember Cotton, Councilmember Hardy,
Here.
Chair Mariano, Mr. Glicksberg for Commissioner Miller,
Here.
Vice Chair Peters,
Here.
Commander Purify,
Here.
Mr. Hunsicker for Commissioner City,
Here.
Ms. Bendixson for Governing Board Member Watkins,
Here.
Councilmember Young. Here we have a quorum.
Wonderful. So then we'll go to no changes on the agenda, I assume?
Correct.
Correct. Okay, then we're going to go for the minutes. We need a motion to approve of May 8th. Do we have a second? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, great. Then we can move on to any public hearing. Is there anybody from the public that wants to be heard? Seeing none.
We do need to officially open the public hearing for the budget, and then I could provide a staff presentation.
Okay, so then we will open the public hearing for the budget.
So on page 7 of the agenda outlines an ad that we ran in the Tampa Bay Times on Wednesday, August 12th, as well as Sunday, August 16th. And it outlines our fiscal year 2027 budgets for the period October 1, 2026 to September 30th, 2027. The budget represents about a 5.4% increase in total expenditures for fiscal year 2027. It's a completely balanced budget at the tune of $4.4 million. That represents about $1.4 million in total operational costs for the program. This is inclusive of our staffing, as well as our accounting, auditing, as well as our legal services, and any overhead in terms of office space rentals and our insurance. That represents about a 3.6% increase over fiscal year 2026 levels. The majority of our expenditures are expected to be through contracted scientific restoration and outreach projects to the tune of about $2.8 million. That represents about a 3.3% increase over fiscal year 2026 levels. And then the remaining expenditures are expected from a partner in-kind project, and for fiscal year 2027, that's actually a project offered by the city of Largo. So in terms of total expenditures, it's pretty straightforward there in terms of the $4.4 million number. And in terms of revenues, we are going to recognize about $2.1 million in federal grant funding to support those expenditures. That represents about a 19.6% increase over fiscal year 2026 levels. And that's majority of funding we're expected for that increase in contracted technical services and outreach support, as I explained previously. In terms of specialty license plate revenues that will support the Bay Mini Grant program, we usually estimate that by a 5-year average of our license plate sales. We're expecting about 106,000 in total license plate revenues next year, and that represents about a 2.8% decrease based on that long-term average and slight decline in license plate sales through time. The next big source of revenues for our budget next year relates to other non-federal contracts and grants, as well as the interlocal agreement funds that we receive through the partnership. That is estimated to be about $1.25 million next year in terms of revenues, and that represents about a 2.2% decrease over fiscal year 2026 levels. And again, the majority of the revenues to support those expenditures are coming from federal grants that we have already in-house, and then we're expecting significant progress on, and we'll start receiving bills for some of those projects, as well as some of the tasks outlined in ongoing projects funded through those federal grants. So as I mentioned, in total, it's a balanced budget on the revenue side. That partner in-kind project is also recognized in terms of revenue on our books for a given fiscal year, and we make up any difference with revenues that we've already collected from prior fiscal years in our agency balance. And next year, we're estimating about $785,000 of already collected revenues to support those expenditures next year. So that concludes my presentation on the budget for fiscal year 2027. And if there's anyone online from the public or in the room, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any public comments? Seeing nobody here, are there any online? No?
No.
Okay, well then we can close the public hearing. And do we need to take a vote on that? Yeah,
Yeah, it will move to the next agenda item 5, and I'll talk a little bit more about the budget, more in depth of the budget. It goes to page 9 on the packet. So a couple of highlights just for additional detail in terms of the overall budget expectations for fiscal year 2027. I just want to call your attention to our direct personnel services. I mentioned this during our briefings, but I have factored in about 5.1% increase in our direct personnel services. This does not represent additional staff for the ESHRE program. This just allows me to provide cost of living adjustments as well as performance increases for my staff as I perform annual reviews for each of my staff. It also factors in about a 8.4% increase in health insurance premium costs that we just received notice from our insurance provider. So in total, that will allow and accommodate for both those cost of living adjustments as well as fringe increases we're expecting in terms of our existing staffing. The other line item I would like to call your attention to is our office storage and meeting space rental. I have about 50,000 budgeted for our office space next year. I've been letting every board member know that our 5-year lease with our current office space and building is coming to end in March. We've been unsuccessful in negotiating adequate terms for us as an organization at that current location. So we're actually looking for alternative spaces. We've been in conversation with the Regional Planning Council and also taking a look at other potential locations to move our offices probably about midway through next fiscal year. I'm anticipating with that move, we'll actually potentially see a slight reduction in our monthly office rental costs, but I'm leaving it about $50,000 just so that I could factor in any moving related expenses as we move all our office space furniture to a new location. So, any adjustments I would bring back to the board next May when we're about halfway through our fiscal year next year. And we actually experienced that move and we can make adjustments there to ratchet down those expected costs in the budget. And then last but not least, as I mentioned in the public hearing, the majority of our expenses are usually tied up in contracted services. And next year represents about a 3.3% increase in those contracted services to the tune of about 2.8 million. And again, that's funding primarily that's supporting federal funding that's primarily supporting our work plan grants as well as some of the IIJA projects that we've put out to about 12 projects in the watershed. Other than that, I'd be happy to answer any other questions in terms of expected expenditures and revenues for next year, if there are any from the board.
questions? Seeing no questions, then I guess we'll be looking for a motion to approve the budget.
So
Got a motion, a second? Second, thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No? Okay,
Great job, Ed.
so we're gonna go to the quarterly financial report.
So on page 11 of your packets is our activity through fiscal year 2026. This report represents about 3/4 of the way through our current fiscal year. What I usually try to draw your attention to is that last column, the percent of the budget that we've experienced this far into the fiscal year. You're expected to see those percentages to be about 75%, primarily on the expenditure side. And we're at or below in many of those line items that expected expenditure level. At this current time period, we're about 60% of what we anticipate in terms of total fiscal year 2026 expenditures. So we've realized about 2.5 million of the 4.2 million that we budgeted and through our amended mid-year budget. That's a little bit less activity than what we're expected for this point of the year, and that's just a product of timing of any bills we're receiving primarily through our contracted services. That's the bulk of our expenses, as I explained in the initial budget discussion. So it's my expectation that we'll probably be coming in a little bit under budget in terms of expenses, and that's not to say that we'll be losing any funding for either of those expenditures that we're anticipating or revenues that we'd seek and to reimburse some of those expenditures. That just means that the bills would probably bleed into the next fiscal year, and we'll start realizing some of those expenses in next year's budget. So as we finalize fiscal year 2026 and we'll bring back the final quarterly report in November to y'all, I'm expecting us to be below budget there in terms of our fiscal year 2026 revenues and expenditures. Only other thing to add is we're about 56% at our expected revenues for this year at about 1.8 million of the 3.2 million that we developed in our budget. And again, that's a product of seeking any reimbursements for expenditures that we'd experienced through the fiscal year. So those two numbers kind of play off each other. And again, we're kind of expecting to be below the expected revenues at the close of this fiscal year. The couple of good news things in terms of on the revenue side, we did receive a lot more contributions and donations than what we were expecting, as well as interest and that we're earning off of some of our savings accounts. So you'll see, those percentages at about 100% or right about that 75% level, and those are good things on the revenue side. That's more revenue than what we budgeted for when we developed the initial budget and then amended it again in the mid-year at the May meeting. So other than that, I'd be happy to answer any other questions you might have on our financial position as it stands this year, fiscal year 26.
I wish I got 100% in my revenue increase. So we're gonna need a motion to adopt the quarterly financial report. A second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Perfect, that passes unanimously. So then we're gonna go on to the elections of officers. So first we have to approve the management board chair and vice chair. Do we have a slate for them?
Yes, so at last Friday's management board meeting, the management board unanimously selected to continue as the management board chair, Ms. Kelly Hammer-Levy, and as vice chair, Dr. Leanne Flewelling.
Okay, and we need to take action on that?
Correct.
So we need to make a motion for Kelly Hammer-Levy to be the chair, and remind me again the second one.
Dr. Leanne Flewelling.
Dr. Leanne to be, thank you, to be the vice chair. We need a motion to adopt that.
So moved.
And a second, and a second. So all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great. So that passes unanimously, and then we're gonna go on to this board, the chair and vice chair. Did Commissioner Mariano say that he wanted to continue?
He did not indicate as such. He'd be happy to serve if needed.
Okay, well, I'd be happy to serve as chair if we have somebody that'd be willing to step up and be vice chair.
Award chair.
Would you? That would be great. Was that Mike or?
Mike.
It was Mike. Okay. Thank you. So we have a slate, and any other nominations? Okay, so we have a slate for myself, Kathleen Peters, to be chair, and for Mike Harding to be vice chair. Do we have a motion? Okay, we got a motion. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so we have a chair and a vice chair.
Congratulations and thank you.
For both boards. And then we're gonna go on to the executive director annual performance evaluation. I guess you wanna leave?
I typically leave the room unless you guys want me to say.
I can tell you, his average score was 4.6. I don't think it's necessary to leave the room unless, you can't take criticism or compliments. So
I offer to leave the room if you guys want to speak candidly about my performance.
do you want him to leave the room or are you guys good? Why don't you stick around? So his average score, like I said, was a 4.6 overall score. I think his lowest score on any category was a 4.4. So I'm looking at this and I could have had him leave, but my intuition tells me there's not a lot of criticism So we think you're doing quite well by your evaluation, and I can tell you on the scores, I was probably your toughest score, and it's only because I don't like the tool. When you meet my expectations, you meet, and my expectations are pretty high. So if you meet expectations, that's pretty high, but it's only a number 3. So it's silly, but anyways, I think you're doing a great job. Does anyone have any comments about the job that our wonderful executive director is doing, or any thoughts about improvements, or even additional recommendations for a place to rent for them? And council member.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have recommendations. I wanted the opportunity to tell Ed, along with the team, that in my year or so doing this, the thing that stands out most is this organization punches way above its weight. It's a team that numbers in the single digits, that acts like it numbers in the hundreds. It's a team that has a budget of $3-4 million that makes it feel like we're spending tens of millions of dollars. The mandate is awesome, but the way you all carry out the mandate is even better. I wish that I had something to offer. That's what this is for. This forum and this exercise is to identify ways to get better, and there are always ways to get better. And I will pay more attention for this year, but this organization runs expertly, and I'm happy to be a part of it, and I appreciate the job you guys do. Thank you, Chair.
Well said. Thank you. Anyone else? Council member Young.
Well, I would just say, as the newest member, I think you guys are doing a fantastic job in making sure that, I'm well informed and up to date and know what's going on. You all do a fantastic job. And even prior to being on council, working with some of the team members when I was working in nonprofit. And so I've actually been able to see, the groundwork that you all do and what you do for the community, and it's really appreciated. So great job.
Aren't you glad you sat in? Come on. Anybody else have any comments or thoughts? Okay. So we don't need action on that one, but good job. Well done. Keep up the great work, and let's find you a place to land for a new office.
Thank you guys for the continued vote of confidence. We're here to serve you all as partners to the program. And as was mentioned, we have a great team, and that, my performance is a reflection of the good work that my team's doing for the region.
Yeah, I echo that. You do a great job. Well said. Councilmember, so very well said. So we're going to go on to the project highlights on St. Pete Beach's Living Shoreline Project, and that's Betty and Tom. Right? Were you doing a presentation?
Yeah.
Great.
Do we mind, we have Gary go next? That
Yeah.
should be here in a few minutes.
Oh, okay. So we're going to do Carrie with the tire reef restoration?
Yeah.
I feel a little odd standing, but I feel more comfortable since I'm standing, so I'm gonna do it. You know that. You can see it from there too. So I'm gonna be talking to you today about a project that we've been working on for several years. And it's had several different components over the years. So we're gonna go through a relic tire reef that was deployed off of the south side of Pinellas County. We're going to go through how we've assessed this relic tire reef, a restoration plan that we've put together with some help of some contractors, and then also some surveys that we've done through the community. All right, so just to kind of take a bird's eye view of where this kind of fits within our framework. Within our comprehensive conservation and management plan, we do have specific activities that pertain to hard bottom areas, which would include things like artificial reefs. So one of them is PH4, which is identify hard bottom communities and avoid impacts. Go ahead. And also within our habitat master plan, we have specific targets and goals for the amount of acreage that we want for each habitat watershed. So for artificial reefs and for hard bottom, we have kind of static goals. So basically we want to keep what we have. So if you look at our targets and goals, you have check marks there. So those are indicating that we've met our goals, but that's basically because we're keeping that amount of habitat. Go ahead. So some of our goals for hard bottom and artificial reefs within the estuary are, first of all, to protect what's there. Second of all, we've funded a lot of projects that identify and track additional hard bottoms. So we've funded some mapping studies. We've also funded some habitat use studies for the types of fish and wildlife that use these areas. And also in general, we want to promote enhancing artificial reef habitat complexity when it's there, and then expand within permanent areas, not necessarily increasing the amount of artificial reef areas, but making what's there better. And that applies to artificial reefs that are appropriate, not the ones that you see here. In the top corner, you can see kind of an extreme example of what has happened in the past as far as tire reefs being dumped, to enhance fisheries habitat, but really as a source of debris, control. So that picture is from the Osborne Tire Reef that's on the east coast of Florida, Fort Lauderdale. It's a very extreme example. All those tires have gone loose and they've damaged reefs nearby. The larger picture is actually a picture of one of the tires in the tire reef off Pinellas County. And you can see that there is some growth on it, some algae, some soft corals, but it's not an appropriate reef material. It wouldn't even be permitted today. And the habitat that's on there is not as vibrant as one that would be a more appropriate material like concrete. Go ahead. So the location of this tire reef, you can see those the blue outline and the blue dots around it. That's basically where it's located, south of Pinellas Point. It covers about a 5-acre area. Keep going. And this is kind of the history. Here are some drawings of the original permit. So this was permitted in the 60s, back when a lot of these types of projects were permitted. There were several that were permitted off the coast of Pinellas County and other areas. And some of those are being in the process of being removed, by our partners in Pinellas County. Anyway, this one was put into place in the 60s. The size is there, and the types of materials that were deployed were tire units. So the idea was to get 3 tires, chain them together, put some concrete in the bottom, and sink them. That's a total of like 13,000 total tires in this one area. They also permitted some concrete clay pipes to put out there as well. And again, the goal of this one back then was to enhance habitat for fisheries. Go ahead. So I'm going to kind of go through a timeline of some of the projects that we've done related to this tire reef. So, 1966 is when it was permitted. Fast forward about 50 years, we had a hard bottom mapping project that was done, funded by us and implemented by CSA, where they actually rediscovered this tire reef. And after that fact, FWC did some surveys on the reef to see what kind of fish were using them. And then most of what I'll be talking about today is the project that started in 2025 and on, where we did additional mapping, tire, benthic, and fish surveys, and developed a restoration plan. In addition, we did some surveys of the scientific and stakeholder communities. So this is some pictures of some of the pre-2025 assessments. So this is before this major project. So this one picture to the left, that's the side scan sonar that CSA found. So you can see kind of like individual tires there. That middle image gives you kind of the outline of the tire reef. And then the baited remote underwater video systems were used to assess fish communities at the reef, later on in 2022. And through that work, that was seasonal sampling in the wet and dry seasons, they found 22 fish species that were observed using the area. Some of which are economically important. If you kind of like look closely, you can see a little gray snapper, using the area there. Go ahead. So for the current project, based on some of that information that we gleaned, we wanted to understand a little bit more of what is actually using the tire reef, what's growing on it. So the objective of this was to understand the current condition, the stability of the reef, how far the spatial extent actually is, and then provide recommendations for potential restoration. So we went through an assessment, we did some planning, which included early coordination with permitting agencies. And then we also did some surveys of our technical committee, so the Habitat Restoration Consortium, the Technical Advisory Committee, and we've also put together an angler survey that we distributed to the public. And then the final step would be deciding a management action and doing some permitting. So we haven't gotten to that stage, so. Some of the results of the assessment that we found, so this is the bathymetry, so the depth areas that are found around the tire reef, relatively shallow, like most bay areas, it's 11 to 15 feet. There is kind of a depth difference. You see that kind of line there. That's basically goes from 11 to 15. So the tire reef is on the deeper side of that. That depth difference is natural. It extends all the way on either side of it. Go ahead. The other thing that you'll notice is that there's a lot of scattering. So the main tire area was what was permitted. That red outline is actually the tire area that was mapped in 2018. And the blue area is what was mapped in 2025. So you see that, the main tire reef area is the most distinct, but you also can see that there's a lot of scatter around that area. And based on the previous and current mapping, it looks like it may have shifted west a bit, and it seems like there might be a larger dispersal of tires. So there were different mapping methods used, but that's what it looks like. The other thing is, we mapped in 2018 and then we mapped in 2025. We've had several storms that have gone through, in 2024 that may have influenced this. And also, if you look at the prevailing winds in this area, they're primarily coming from the northeast. So, that would make sense with potential movement. But so then our consultant went into the water and actually surveyed the number of tires. So basically their goal was to count the number of tires and let us know how many were still there. They did that using a variety of methods, swimming in transect or doing radial swims around. So after doing that field verification, they found that in total there were about 8,000 tires estimated in the area. Most of them were in the main reef, but they did estimate that there were quite a few that were scattered around. If you remember back to the original permitted number, that was about 13,000. So, there's a little bit of difference there. You'll also see that there's different conditions too. So some of them were still in 3s, but there were several that were in 2s, several that were in just single tires, and then some that were degraded to the point where it was just, kind of wispy, tire stuff. They also saw in the field these tire pits, which is basically just indentations where it looked like there used to be a tire there and it may have been recent. Okay. So then, while they were doing the tire surveys, they also did epifaunal and benthic habitat surveys, looking at basically what's growing on the tires and the habitat around it. Most of the area is fine coarse sand. There's not seagrass within the general area of that tire reef. They also saw octocorals and sponges mostly, and several other types of encrusting organisms. Occasionally they saw a few corals, but not many, and most of those were growing on the concrete left over inside the tires. They also found some sponges just growing out of the sand. You see that far picture there. It looks like there's nothing, but the tires were actually buried and the octopus were growing out of those. They saw 13 fish species observed while they were there. If you remember back to the FWC survey, they saw 22. So again, they're still seeing fish use of the habitat, and some of those are. So we went into this, we did the assessment, and then we wanted to put together a restoration plan. We know that tires are not appropriate artificial roof materials, so we wanted to look into, what's lessons learned from similar projects. This screenshot here is of the planning of the Osborne tire removal. So they did it in stages. They had a lot more tires to remove, but we were able to look at previous projects and how they did that. We also had pre-application meetings with federal and state partners on permitting and, what would be acceptable to them. And basically, because this area was a sand area, tire removal is an option as far as it would be considered restoration. We also wanted to look into the costs because, depending on what we do, it can range widely in the cost on potential restoration actions. Okay, go ahead. So our consultant, along with us, came up with 3 different recommendations. So the first one would be to remove all of the tires. So this would restore the site to pre-deployment conditions, which would be sand. And then, to do that, we'd implement like a predetermined grid system to track the removal process. This would remove all the concerns of tire dispersal and, potential contaminant leaching from the tire materials itself. Go ahead. The second recommendation would be either to enhance the area or encapsulate the area. So by enhance, they mean stabilizing the perimeter. So putting more appropriate artificial reef materials around the main tire reef area so that it doesn't move. Encapsulation would be covering the entire thing. So, getting concrete and other materials that are more appropriate and covering that entire reef area. Both of these options could include also removing some of the scattered tires around the main tire reef. And then the third recommendation is continued monitoring. So this would be establishing a structured monitoring program, doing what we did in 2025 and continuing to do that, which would track the site's stability over time and ecological function. But that wouldn't address the current concerns. It's only interim solution. So and the bonus is this is the cheapest option initially, and it can be scaled to meet budget availability. But if we do end up monitoring and there becomes more problems with movement or contaminants, we go back to those original 2 options. So there are pluses and minuses to this, and this is kind of a table of some of those, but I'll just point your attention to the costs. So for removal, again, this one will get rid of any of the concerns that we have that will initially disturb the site. The cost on this could be relatively high, and it varies drastically depending on whether we all the tires, partial removal, how difficult it is once we get out to the field. So it could range from 3 million to 5 million. The enhancement and encapsulation, it could be less expensive than tire removal, or it could be much more depending on the design and decide to do. This one will address tire movement, but the tires will still be in the environment. And the positive on that, we wouldn't be disturbing what's growing on the tires at this point. The third one, again, is continued monitoring. So that is on the cheaper side with, 50 to 75K per sampling event. But again, that would be a repeated thing. So we might have to do another one of those recommendations. So for considering what we're going to be doing on this, we want to keep in mind our long-term objectives and restoration goals for the area. Obviously, funding resources is going to be something we'll need to talk about. We also want to consider our tolerance for long-term environmental risk. The other thing is, there are 3 options, but we could combine, 1 or 2 of these. For example, stabilize and remove. So what we wanted to do with these 3 options is get feedback from the scientific community and stakeholders. So we went to our technical advisory committee. You can go ahead. And asked them which one of these options they would prefer. So, this graph is just kind of showing you where they would lie under proposed management actions. Instead of the 3, we actually gave them 5 options. So there would be the monitoring option, stabilizing the perimeter of the reef, encapsulating or putting materials on top of the reef, removing some of the tires or removing all of the tires. So if they strongly supported it, they'll be higher up on that graph. And then if they opposed it, they'll be at the bottom. If they're in that gray area, that means that, they're kind of neutral. So you can go ahead and put up the results. So overwhelmingly, the technical advisory committee preferred removing all the tires or partially a partial removal. And the lowest on the list was monitoring. They were somewhat neutral in stabilizing the perimeter or covering with concrete. So just to put this into perspective, the technical advisory committee saw, the same presentation that you've seen, so they knew all the backgrounds and even more details than that. And they're making this on a, kind of a informed decision. We had about 35 members that voted in this. The Habitat Restoration Consortium also provided their input. It was relatively similar, but a much smaller size, much smaller number of people participated. So this is representative of our technical stakeholders. So we wanted to know what anglers thought about this. So Blake and I put together a survey to see what their perceptions of artificial reefs and tire reefs are. So I'm going to turn it over to Helen.
Yeah, so kind of as Carrie was saying, we wanted to get an idea of what our anglers in the community thought, because this would affect a lot of them, especially the folks that use the tire reefs as one of their preferred fishing locations. So what we wanted to do was send out a relatively short survey to as many anglers as we could throughout the Tampa Bay area. We know that the angling community is very fatigued by survey requests. A lot of places like FWC regularly send out surveys to try to better understand catches and species and things like that. So we sent out a very wide net, emails out to over 225,000 fishing and boating license holders across our counties, in hopes that at least a small fraction of them would actually respond to us. And we were pleased that 485 actually went through and gave us very good answers that we could use. But we also thought, since who knows when we'll be able to get them to respond again, we wanted to also add in some other questions, more generally speaking, about the types of habitats that they prefer and things like that, so that we can use that for our own habitat management functions. So if you proceed one more, you can see these are all the things that the survey includes. It talks about, it gauges their experience fishing in Tampa Bay over time, their preferred locations, the habitats they like to target, the fish that they like to target, and then particularly for the survey, their use of different types of artificial reefs, and of course their perceptions of tire reefs and actions available to them. I won't go over all of the results in this, but eventually it'll come out on a technical report. So if you want to learn more about just what people are doing out on the water, or on the shorelines, you'll be able to see more of that later. So just as setting some context for those 485 folks, so that you can better understand who the type of angler is that is taking this survey. Most of the anglers are coming from either Hillsborough or Pinellas counties. Most of them are older, 45 and predominantly men. A little over half of the folks have been fishing in Tampa Bay for over a decade, and most of them are relatively casual anglers. So they fish in Tampa Bay a few times or maybe once a year. Most of them aren't going out on the water on a regular weekly or even on that kind of basis. And we also, we know that anglers are very protective of their secret fishing spots. And so we knew that they went exactly where they like to fish. So we came up with this nice little middle ground where in our survey, we actually created this interactive grid where we asked the anglers to select all of the areas where they typically spend their time fishing so that we can get some kind of detailed idea, but they don't have to reveal exactly where it is that they like to spend their time. So this is the grid that we gave them, and you can see the little grid where our beloved Tire Reef is placed in that area. So we could get a better idea of where it is that people fish, but also how many of them are spending their time fishing in this Tire Reef, whether they know it or not. And so the next one, you can see a heat map of people's responses. So the warmer a color is, that's where most anglers are spending their time fishing. The results on the left are for all of our anglers, probably not very surprising in that the hot spots are showing up around the north and south skyway piers. So most anglers, whether they go out on the water or go from a pier, most people are spending time at some point on skyway piers. But also you can see some of the colder spots are up there in Old Tampa Bay and Hillsborough Bay. And if you look at that little highlighted square where our Tire Reef is, overall, we see that about 17% or about 1 in 6 anglers say that they occasionally use the Tire Reef location for their fishing. But if we zoom in just to folks that specifically say that they use Tire Reefs, at least sometimes when they're fishing, we can see that the Tire Reef location is a bit more popular for them. About 1 in 5 or 21% of them are spending their time in that area, but also they generally like to spend time around the pier much more frequently than just your general angler. So how do we know about who is using the Tire Reefs? Well, we asked them about, generally the text is a bit small here, but we asked them how often they spend time in different types of fishing habitats. And so the darker the color, the more frequently they use those habitats. And so the most popular ones are natural shorelines, so beaches, mangroves, those sorts of things, as well as exposed infrastructure like bridges, piers, etc. Seagrass beds are also another popular habitat one. But then you can see the artificial reef material, and if you progress one more in there, then we can see sort of here's the section of folks that are at least spending some of their time fishing in artificial reef habitats. So we want to focus in on those folks. And so in the next slide, we take all of those anglers that say they spend some time in artificial reefs, and we ask them what types of artificial reefs. And so we've got things like rocks, concrete, those prefabricated modules, like those reef balls sort of things. And then of course at the end, we have our tires. So again, we're looking at how often they typically use these, but also leaving them some opportunity to say if they're not entirely sure what exactly the material is that's underneath them for their. Basically, you can see that rocks and concrete are the most popular ones, but once we get to the tires, this is the one where there is less frequent usage of the Tire Reefs, but also almost half of the anglers weren't sure if they actually ever use Tire Reefs. So it's the biggest source of uncertainty in terms of materials. But what we can see is of the people, what we can see is of the people who say that they know that they use Tire Reefs, that's about 15% of all of our anglers. That number is likely higher for the people that do fish there but don't know it. And then you can look at this other pie chart. Basically, what we see is that the majority of people are these other reef users. So they use artificial reefs, but not Tire Reefs. And then the gray percentage is the people who never use Tire Reefs. So next, now that we have a better idea of who these folks are, we ask them about their perceptions about these. So we have questions that ask about the perceptions of Tire Reefs. And so we have some negative perceptions and positive ones. The negative ones, we have statements about Tire Reefs worsening water quality and damaging natural habitats. And we ask them how much, going too fast, Ed.
Sorry. I'm trying to anticipate.
And so we have these statements about how much they agree. The blue ones are strong agreement, and the orange ones are disagreement. And what we can see is for these negative perceptions, we're generally seeing most people agreeing with them. So these anglers are holding more strongly negative opinions about Tire Reefs. But then we also have positive ones, so that they attract a lot of desirable fish, stabilize sediments or prevent erosion, and they're useful for restoring habitats. And here we can kind of see a growing trend in opposition of these positive statements. A little bit more mixed in the attracting desirable fish and preventing erosion. It's about 50-50 on it. But by and large, what we're seeing is that there's generally more negative sentiments than there are positive about tire reefs. And we thought, okay, that's useful, but maybe that's just how they feel about artificial reefs in general. So we wanted to compare their perception of tire reefs to concrete reefs. And if we progress one more, you can see the difference in perceptions of concrete reefs. And now we see almost the exact opposite, where the negative sentiments people are largely in disagreement with, whereas the positive sentiments they're largely in agreement with. So that tells us that it's not just all artificial reefs being viewed as the same, they really have different perceptions of tire reefs versus concrete reefs in general. So moving on from that, getting into that big question of what management actions do our anglers support? Again, here we see the same graph that Carrie showed earlier, trying to look out for that zone, things outside of that zone of neutrality. So the results, let's see if we progress one more. Here's what our anglers thought. So basically similar to what we saw in the TAC, we see all generally on the whole, more support for complete removal of the tires as well as partial removal of the tires. Coming in fairly positive, but also a little bit more neutral is stabilization of the perimeter. Covering with rock or concrete is also kind of neutral, but a little lower on the end. And then, like our TAC, the no action, the just monitoring was the lowest amongst our anglers. And if we progress one more, we can see exactly how that compares here to our technical advisory committee. So largely a similar degree of alignment in here, but one of the things that I do want to highlight here is that the removal of the tires actually has a higher degree of variation amongst respondents in here. So we took a little bit deeper dive into the responses from our anglers and we said, well, does this differ between people who use tire reefs and people who don't? So the people who might be most affected by a removal of tire reefs, do they feel differently than other folks? And what I want to draw your attention to is the green folks here. Those are the people that use tire reefs and at least know that they use tire reefs compared to folks who don't. So, and what we can see is that this removal of all the tire reefs, which generally across the board has more support, has lesser support among the people who actually use tire reefs. And although they are generally in favor, you can see a lot of folks do support that, there's a larger range of variation. So it's a little bit more of a controversial idea amongst tire reef users. You're more likely to encounter folks that strongly support it or strongly opposite it, compared to an option like stabilizing the perimeter, which still has a generally high level of agreement, but there's less variation. So not as many people are going to be as mad or as happy of choosing an option like that. But still fairly neutral is also the idea of partial removal in there. And we also looked a little bit further into different types of anglers and what they support. And so in the next slide, we look at fishing experience. So what we can kind of see in here is differences in perceptions of these management actions depending on how long they've been fishing in Tampa Bay. And what we actually see here is that the people who have spent the most time fishing in Tampa Bay are more supportive of complete tire removal and a little less supportive of stabilizing the perimeter than the folks that have been fishing here for only a shorter amount of time. So it's again kind of thinking about the different types of anglers that are going to be more supportive of different management actions and how you would have to kind of deal with those perceptions along the way. So as a kind of wrap up, to put all of these into a big picture in case it involves becoming loud circuit music in your head, basically what we saw is that a decent amount of folks are actually using the tire reef location, about 15%, but almost 50% of people don't actually know if they fish in tire reefs at all. So it's likely much larger than 15% of folks that are using that habitat. We do see that most of them hold negative views specifically of tire reefs compared to other types of artificial reef habitats. Overall, we do see that complete tire removal has the most support across all anglers in Tampa Bay, but it is more divisive amongst tire reef users. So the folks that are going to be most affected by it, they have a more divisive opinions in that mix. If we look at something like perimeter stabilization, that does generally have a decent amount of support and it's more consistent support. So it's another thing to think about in terms of making a decision and how strongly people of that community might be for or against something. But also another option when we think about what Carrie mentioned in terms of considering cost, like how expensive is it going to be to completely remove the tires? Is that actually a practical solution? Is that feasible? Thinking about something like partial tire removal, which could be significantly cheaper than complete tire removal, but also less controversial among anglers, maybe another sort of sweet spot to kind of consider when you're weighing, how you make these decisions about management questions. But all of that is to say that there's different options that we can take here. We're seeing different types of support among anglers, and so then the next stage is thinking about how we put all of this together to make some decisions. So I'll have Carrie.
So we did the same presentation for the management board last week, and basically put it to them, we would like to make a decision on one of these management recommendations. And the thing is, we do have permitting available for some of this. Funding for implementation, that would be something we'd have to search for in the future, but we do have money to permit one of these options with our current contractor. So we had a lot of good conversations, I think, with the management board as far as, what they thought about the different options. They asked a lot of questions about the assessment. So we wanted to open the floor for you all as well. I will just summarize kind of the management board's thoughts at the end of our discussion. Most agreed that removal would be probably the best option, and how we do that might change depending on funding, whether it's, kind of a tiered approach or piggybacking on some of the work that Pinellas County is already doing with reefs that are offshore and those removals, and potentially looking into replacing or putting more appropriate artificial reef materials at that same site later, to kind of, look at both sides of the coin there. So I know we threw a lot of information at you about this, so we'd love to have your opinions on it.
Councilmember.
Thank you. Thank you for all the work. I'm gonna ask about funding, but I would agree that the best path is if we can get it out of here, let's just go that route. Do we have an idea of in this project in its totality, how much funding we'll need?
Yeah, so you saw in that chart, there's a huge range in the cost.
Right.
And it really is gonna depend. So the tires that are out there are older tires. They, from what they found at the Osborne Tire Reef, when they started removing them, the tires that were in better shape, it was much easier to remove, but once you got more down to the degraded tires, it got more difficult. So a lot of it may be kind of on the ground adaptation. But yeah, we're talking definitely in the millions for removal.
Yeah, part of the management board discussion was to think about the initial phases of permitting a full removal, but doing it in stages as funding might allow, just to, start work towards implementing, doing something at the reef.
And I'm sure we've thought about it, but any grants or assistance at either the federal or the state level that have promise?
Yeah, so Pinellas County and their tire removal grant was a marine debris removal grant through NOAA, so that's a potential. There are other various things that we can talk about pursuing as well.
Quick, Chair.
Yeah.
That's my funding.
I'm trying to ask her, I would think it'd be easier to give as a granting agency that you're gonna remove them all. Than have a lower. And then maybe you would say, well, remove them, we will remove them all in this quarter.
Yeah.
And then we'll remove them all instead of just like we get 30% of them or 50% of them.
Yeah, so, in a lot of the, assessments part of this, the main tire roof area would be easier for those because they're, kind of all in one, area. The scattered ones might be more difficult because they're harder to find. And a lot of some of the discussion at the management board was, well, how dense are those tires? So this isn't like that picture that I showed you, the Osborne Reef, they're all kind of piled on top of each other. There's 3 tire units or 2 or 1, and there's like 6 to 10 feet left between them. So, they are denser in that tire reef area, but and some of them are buried too. So
Are the ties holding? So you pick up the 3 at a time or the ties that degraded?
it really depends. So like, if you went back to that one pic, you could just see strands of tires in some of them. Some of them are completely, intact. Some of them still have the concrete in it, so it's sort of and done all the things for, figuring out how to do it.
So you mentioned some were buried. Mapping technology, is that able to identify tires that were 100% buried or?
No, that was more when we did the field verification where they saw the corals kind of peeping out of just sand. And they used a metal pole to kind of, look around for more, but that's a pretty crude estimation of what's
So there could be
that.
more, they're just completely buried.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a fair assumption considering how much was permitted versus how much was not permitted there. There also have been instances where some of these tires have shown up on, shorelines as well, so.
Pardon me? Oh, we've got some people online too that,
Yeah, go ahead, Johnny.
Thank you, Chair. Quick question. You have a large, I think you said 5-acre space that you're looking at doing this removal on. What would have you looked at the environmental impacts of removing it? I think you've spoken to a lot of the tires for different layers and different degradation levels. I mean, and you're already doing water quality samples. What type of impacts do you foresee if you move in that direction of total removal or partial removal?
Yeah, so the initial would be, obviously disturbing the sediment, potential turbidity. Those would all be things that would have to be taken into consideration in permitting. But in our initial discussions with the state and federal agencies, they seem to think it would be a pretty straightforward permitting process, especially since there aren't seagrasses in close proximity to the project site.
I think I'm speaking more, and I'm trying to hone in on the tire degradation as you pull it out of the sand, impacted them breaking apart. I think you said some of it had already frayed. Those things would then go into the water column. Have you looked at that, or is that a consideration? Or I think that's as you're, I think, pointing to a permitting process. But what have you guys found? I think you said you had another project where you looked at it as an example. Was there anything discussed in that example that you reviewed?
So the Osborne Tire Reef project that I was talking about, so they started with, the easier tires to remove. And a lot of these are for, they're tires that were manufactured at later dates. So they have more kind of structure to them than some of the tires that we might be seeing that were put out in the 60s. So it may be that we can't remove all of the tires just because of, the state of their degradation, but we will be able to get the larger ones that are a little bit more refined.
Yeah, this question came up also during the management board meeting about concerns of the tires continue to break down, and especially like you were suggesting during the removal process, that we're increasing that chance of the breakdown. But the longer these tires remain in the environment and with additional storm events, that breakdown process is probably going to occur into the future. So there's that sort of concern with continued sort of attrition of those tire particles in and around the deployment site. But there's also sort of the secondary concern because there's been so much scatter and some of these tires has washed ashore where there are seagrasses that the longer they're in place, the more potential they are to impact adjacent habitats that, we hold high value for. So doing some sort of remediation seemed to be an option that the management board, suggested to support. It's just a matter of how we could accomplish that in potential stages. And being sensitive to what you suggested, the breakdown of the tires as we potentially remove them.
Any other thoughts or comments? Councilmember Young?
If is this anywhere else? Are there any other states or cities that have this type of?
So this tire reef, was actually initially in the marine debris, grant that Hells County had to remove. So there's several tire reefs offshore, that they're active, implementing removal. There was some concerns about this one just because it's in shallower water, and we wanted to make sure that doing our due diligence and making sure that we're not making things worse by but it seems like, based on the assessment, it's probably astonishing. But yes, it definitely was common for tires to be put out there in that time frame.
But this one was a surprise for us. We actually discovered it during a hard bottom mapping project where there were a few folks who had sort of been around the region for a very long time and recalled it being installed, but this is not one that was in prior assessments for us before 2018 or so.
Well, I'm curious as to, I guess, what was like the thought process, who thought of tires and why tires?
Well, I mean, I think it was just one of those where,
Nobody wants them. It's before it's before recycle, right? This is,
artificial reef
Yeah.
is definitely the wild ones.
Yeah.
Now there's specific materials that are approved for, there's a lot of different things that have to be done to materials that are put out there, make sure they're clean, and if it's a ship, making sure all of the oil and gas is out of it. So we've got a lot better safeguards in place about what's being put out there.
So I looked it up. There are an awful lot of them. And apparently, there are some issues with them, those tire piles catching on fire. I guess when they catch on fire, it's really bad.
right. You can't put them out when they start on fire. It's bad.
We've gotten a little bit more in our thinking in the past 50 years.
Yeah, we're shredding them and recycling, but we didn't do that in the 60s. Mayor?
The original permit stuff, do we know that it was sand before the tires were put there?
Yeah, that's probably why they chose that.
And I'm curious if the tires itself are preventing seagrass growth.
Current there is pretty strong.
Oh.
So even when we were out doing assessments, I was out with them, the contractors went down and dove it, and they had a hard time, kind of doing their assessments with it. Yeah, a little bit, it's a little
Deeper than where seagrasses usually grow in Tampa Bay.
Any other questions or comments? This is great discussion. Now you're looking for a recommendation, or do we have any consensus on any thoughts?
Again, in the FY 27 work plan budget, we do have funding that supports moving this project through permitting. And so the recommendation of the management board was for us to pursue a path to full removal. If you all are comfortable with that, I think staff will proceed that way.
So do we have some consensus on agreeing with full removal? I'm seeing nods, yes, you've got, yes. That's unanimous consensus you have.
Thank you. And if you all want more information on this, want to dig into it, the last slide has, all the different assessments we did and the reports and things like that. If you want more.
Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna go back to the living shoreline, St. Pete Beach.
Yeah, we have some guests here today to discuss this project, and this was an attempt for us to try to remove barriers to implementing living shorelines on more privately owned shorelines. So partnership between the city of St. Pete Beach and EcoSphere Restoration to develop some of the designs on this public-private shared shoreline. And Tom's going to give a little bit more details and some of the lessons learned from the project.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak today. I'm not gonna be speaking by myself. I have Betty here and she is, force behind this. But I wanted to talk first on the technical and how we got here, and I'd like her to talk about as a resident and a former city councilwoman, city's doing in relation to this. Again, I'm with the Ecosphere Restoration Institute. We have done a lot of living shoreline projects, but it's been about 4 years ago. I talked to Betty and she was interested in trying to put reef walls or do something more natural than a vertical seawall, and her seawall is going to be failing. And so if you go to the next slide, some of this you guys know, but I had this because this was for the management forum. There's a lot of hardening of shorelines, right? And Florida is no exception. In some parts of Florida, it's 80%. In Broward County, Pinellas County, it's just under 55% of all the shorelines hardened. Of the 8,000 miles of shoreline in the state, almost 50% of it's hardened. And it's kind of hard to believe because a lot of the state is natural, but all these filling of lands and putting subdivisions where they used to see grass adds up. And a lot of Oregon shoreline. Next slide, please. And that's what I'm talking about, right? This would never happen today, but that was big time activity going on in the 50s, almost into the 70s. I feel like it's dredging at the bottom, filling all the seagrass there, and worse than that, they didn't use floating turbidity barriers in there that day. So in addition to hundreds of acres are being directly destroyed. The plumes that happen afterwards just took out literally 1,000 acres of seagrass. So majorly impactful, but we're not changing that. And all those little lots there's no backyard. I mean, you're 3 feet from the pool and then there's your seawall. So there's not a lot of room to do living shoreline. So we have to do more stuff like living seawalls, right? You're going to have to keep these seawalls in here probably, but we can do something in just a barren article. Next one. And so if you do seawall enhancement, these are not really living shorelines, and the fact that as sea level rise in 30, 40 years from now, the little habitat that you created is going to be underwater. There's no room for it to really move up slope. But for those 20 to 30 years, we're going to have some ecosystem services. And so these are just examples of living seawall enhancement projects. Next slide, please. And this is same place. This is on Hillsborough River, Eulalie, and you can see the mangroves have grown to 7 feet tall. They're trimmed at that. They're not blocking the view, and they're providing all these ecosystem services, protecting the seawall. Actually, taking out the waves before you hit the seawall. So we don't have to make anything that wide, but we can do something by condition. Next slide. There's last thing I want to say that you can put these panels on your seawall. They have weight to them. You have to make sure your seawall can handle it, but they're better than a flat wall. They don't have any vegetation growing in there, but they do provide interstitial spaces for critters to live in, and it's better than, again, a vertical wall. So that's another option. Next slide, please. And one more, that's just a picture of some of this, one more. So the history is we went to the Tampa Bay SRO program, asked for help, because this is not just 3 landowners that have one seawall they want to do something right with. This is the city's involved, because the way this is set up, and I'll show you in a photo unit in the next photos, is that every one of those 3 houses, you start with a house with the boat on the dock right there, and that's Betty's place, and then go south is her neighbor, and one more south. Those are 3 different shorelines. They have slightly different designs to them currently and looks to them. And so the residents own their property, but then the city's road is there. So then the city owns that, and 25 feet towards the seawall. And that last 10 feet, the residents own again. So it's a partnership between the city's property and the private property. And that, I think, made it eligible for the SRO program to be involved to fund a project. And the project is, what can we do with these 3 different properties? Come up with a design that fits these, that actually fit another 70 plus adjacent landowners that we could literally hand the plans to. Say, here's your engineering designs. You don't have to pay for this, you can use it, you might adjust it, your dock might be to the left compared to one of these, but it's a minor change. And here's the type permits you can go. And we made and we'll talk about the design, but we wanted to make this easy for the residents. right? So next slide. This is gonna be a drone view of those three places again. You can see the three houses. The seawall in the middle is completely failing when I got there. I mean, it was falling in the water, and all this time to get the permits and design, not only does it fall in the water, it pulled the northern seawall down with it. That is property. And so it's a problem. Now, the southern property has the old 1950s seawall still in there. Now, it never was risen, and it's all green because it's all mangroves. So it actually is a living shoreline. Now, it's not providing any resiliency for the infrastructure, for the road, for the homes, because it's all low. The northern seawall is 3.3 elevation, the middle one's 3, and the old seawall is at 2.6, and the road's at 2.2. So any king tide is coming through and in, either through the stormwater system or directly in and flooding these streets. And so it's a problem. This is a very low-lying community. And so the city has adopted the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council's elevation of 5. So all these new seawalls have to go up to 5. They'll provide some protection for into the future and all the king tides that are coming in. But everybody has to do it, right? If you leave one out, obviously you don't have the protection. So that's why we're trying to get more folks to do this. Next slide, we'll look at some of these designs. There's no way you can see this, but I wanted to show you that each site has a slightly different design, which is applicable to many other places. Next slide. Basically, what we're going to be doing is cutting the seawall. We're going to replace the seawall, but we're going to actually make it lower. The seawall itself will be lower or at the same height it is now, but behind it, we're putting fill that's going to go up to an elevation of 5. So water can go over the seawall. It has extra tiebacks for that. And now when it does that, it's actually going into a natural spot. So you have that 2 feet of elevation and it's slope so that you can have marsh there, mangroves, and we're going to be planting those species there. Now, on the southern one, where it's all mangroves, we don't do anything. That is a living shoreline essentially, but we do protect it. So we're going to put the seat wall. Let's do the next slide, please. And these are just the graphics of the first 2. You can see the seawall about the same height it is, but you can see how the dirt is filled up behind it to get to the elevation 5 to provide that protection on both the 2 middle properties. Next slide. And what we're doing on this, let's go one more slide. What we're doing on the 3rd property, we're just putting a seat wall in the upland. You know, it's only sticking out of the ground 18 inches. It's well anchored, so water can come up through the mangroves, but it's not going in the street no more. And so that's the easiest way to do it. Just put that retaining wall on the inside. And so each one has a different cost. And so working with the design, I want to talk about the design real quick. Currently today, if you have a seawall, you can replace it without a permit. In fact, you can go 18 inches into the water. You can be a coral there, it doesn't matter. You're exempt to go 18 inches out, put your new seawall. And that's what a lot of the contractors do. But we wanted something that's easier. First of all, there are corals just off of this seawall from the rocks and riprap that's down there. So we can't go out in the water and do much in there. So instead of making it an 18-inch impact of this new seawall, we made a 12-inch one. We did that to make the permitting easier, because by going only 12 inches, we skip past Pinal County's permit. We don't need one. And we're not trying to avoid permits, we're just trying to make it easier for people to get permits. And by doing that, the DEP could issue the permit and issue the Corps' authorization. So we only needed 1 permit. We had that in 2 months, which is just unheard of. And that helped because of the MARC, Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. We introduced it to them twice, and by the time the permit came through, DEP pushed it right through. So we want that to make it easier. So the last piece we did, we wrote a manual or a guide for homeowners. Here's how you do this to permit it. Here's all the contacts. Use this design, and you can get this quicker one-stop permitting to put this in. And we want that to be handed out to the residents. The city is going to be doing that. Next slide, please. And so that's the overall picture of it and the plants, the number of plants that are going in. And I think the next slide is just talking about status. All the permits are issued, designs done, signed and sealed. We are just trying to get that out to the residents. We had a public meeting. Blake was there, talked to the residents there to get their, see how they are reacting to some of this. And now we're trying to get this out to them. And I think the quickest thing that happens, as soon as these 3 residents puts theirs in, all the eyes are watching, right? They'll get to see these. And then we're trying to get it. Betty's been really good. I think she has 6 more neighbors lined up ready to go. So I just wanted to talk about that on the technical side. Now I wanted to hear it from the resident side and the city council person. She can talk about what the city's doing. All right, so thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you for pushing me over. I was a little lost in before. I went to the wrong side, back again, and I'm like, I don't have a truck, so. So anyways, I apologize for that, but my name is Betty Rosnicki. I am a resident of St. Pete Beach. I moved to St. Pete Beach in 2010, but I'm a Florida native, so I know there are not that many around, but I've been in the south side from Miami to Reddington Beach to Tampa as well. So real love for this community and for the environment. My background is in marine biology. I studied marine biology at the University of Miami. And so that's always been in the back of my mind, but I'm an educator, I'm a teacher, teaching science. So you know, I'm a proponent for this. So moving to my home, which you all saw on the map, I was a resident, became president of the neighborhood, and then former St. Pete Beach commissioner for the city. So I've been very involved in the community and know many of the needs of our residents, but some of the struggles that they have is not knowing options. Which is what's been very difficult. My mind thinks a little bit different because I think for the environment. And so when I look out into the water and I see what we have, Tom mentioned there's coral, and I do dive outside with my daughter, we snorkel, we do see what's out there, and there is corals, so I was always so amazed. How can we have a coral reef right off of my house, so, and I don't have to go out on my boat, to go see it. So, but with that, I also know the struggles that Tampa Bay goes through in water quality. And it was nice to see I don't want to say it was nice. I live in the part, Doncaster neighborhood was not dredged. Okay, so, but I am surrounded by a lot of the community that was dredged back in that day when you saw the image that Tom put up there. But with that, a lot has happened to our seagrasses, right? So I know we're working really hard to try to improve it. But as a resident, we don't know our options. My easy option would have been to just call a seawall company and come out and install my seawall. I don't know any different. Again, typical resident who has no background on the environment are going to go with whatever their contractor tells them to do, right? So working with my neighbors, we all talking about it, and we all want to protect the environment. We're very fortunate where we live, but we have 3 properties all together that are all in different situations. Mine is a little bit deeper off of my seawall. The middle neighbor from that image starts getting a little bit shallower, and then as we progress to the further south end, then we get to a mangrove area. And me and my neighbor would say, well, why can't we have mangroves? Because we know the redfish are going, they're breeding. We have all the anglers outside of our home and they're fishing. So we know that we have the dolphins coming by, they're feeding on the mullet. I mean, it's just like, wow, all this is happening right here. And we want to protect it because again, it would have been easier for me to call a contractor who within the permit would have probably dug up that reef, right? And nobody here would have known about it. Nobody would have known what had happened, but we want to do the right thing. We want to improve the water quality. Along Maritana, which is the street that I live on, it's not only mangroves, but oyster beds. I mean, there's a lot of oyster beds as you progress around towards the Doncaster Hotel. All of that is just oyster beds. And we want to protect it because I know it's been happening. We've had a couple of new seawalls. Unfortunately, we all know about the hurricanes that went through. So a lot of people did lose their seawalls and are trying to protect their shoreline. And they're just digging it all right up. Okay, no one's coming out here to stop them from removing all those great oysters that are actually providing better water quality. So again, the problem or the struggle that I had as a resident was knowing what's available, how do you get permitted, and all the hurdles that we have to go through to get there. And like Tom said, it's probably 4 years. Unfortunately, I hate to say it was 2 years since those hurricanes, right? So That's kind of thrown us off a lot. But my first, before meeting Tom, I had met with Tampa Bay Watch. We said, well, how about if we get reef balls? You know, we keep seeing this on the news, right? Why wouldn't we put reef balls out there and we can maybe get a real big one and plant some mangroves on top of the reef ball, and then we can get our mangroves that way. And then, no, you can't do that because DEP won't let you, you know. And so like, okay, so we got to get a permit there. And somehow we connected with Tom, and, you know, I saw some of the projects Tom had been doing in the community. I said, well, why can't we do that? And, you know, we said, well, we got to make this easier because time keeps passing. Most residents wouldn't be waiting, you know, 4 years, much less 2, much less 1, to kind of get this done. So we started to get a little bit creative on what can we do. And working with Tom, we did get these permits. We just got the sign and seal permits. I have actually 3 now seawall companies that are bidding us, right? So we've got one that we're probably going to end up working with because they want to, you know, stick to the plans that we have. And think out of the box to do this differently. It's really hard. But in that, now we have 10, so it's up to 10 now, 10 residents along that street that just got yesterday their estimates for what it would cost to build this project. So we hope to keep this kind of rolling through to get done. But again, my struggles, or what I ask for the future, is how can we make this type of permitting easier? Because between the FDEP, Pinellas County, and I know there's one more. Which one is it? Yes. It's a struggle, you know, and I feel like I'm fighting against the people who want us to go in this direction, right? We want to improve the water quality, but if we make so many hoops for a resident to try to make it better environmentally, not only protecting our properties, because, you know, it is a shoreline stabilization, right? We're trying to stabilize our shoreline, but we want to do it a little bit different. And there's a lot of people who are willing to do this, and we're lucky that we did get this homeowner's guide that we're posting on our website on St. Pete Beach, so that any resident can read the options that we have, and also take these plans, which fortunately it's the 3 different levels, you know, from depth to shallow area that can be transferable. So we have about 70 properties along all the east, west, south Maritimes in the Down to Star subdivision that will be able to do this kind of construction. And what's really nice, it is a public-private partnership because I do not own all that land behind. Like Tom was saying, most people have their pool within 3 feet of their seawall, so you don't have that much wiggle room. But if we had more than 18 inches we could work with, that's what I would push for, because I kind of understand why DEP has it this way. But if I can't get a slope big enough off of my seawall to be able to add to improve for environment, right, for wildlife, for other things other than a vertical wall, then we'll never be able to get to do it. So I know we're being stopped not to go past those 18, but if the intention was to improve the environment, then, you know, there needs to be a different set of permits allowed for residents who are trying to do this. I know there's some residents in Vina Del Mar that have been trying to do something different too, and they're going through the same struggle. So now they're opting to do, I don't know if you heard of those oyster ropes that you can hang off their dock, you know, that's the option they're going to, because again, years have passed and they're like, we're just not making headway here. And we've had, and they've all paid money to have DEP come out to surveys, geotech surveys, and it's just lengthy. And you know, very few people would want to wait that long to go through permitting. It's easier to just, again, pick up the phone and a contractor will tell you, hey, no, we're going to do it this way. And you know what you know, and you're just going to go with what they say. We're never going to help as a resident with the most ownership in the state of Florida probably is private, right? How are we going to improve a lot? And I'll just think of Pinellas County or Tampa Bay. How are we going to improve Tampa Bay if most of the coastline is privately owned? So we need to think of something different. So I'm asking for obviously help permitting, education. This is an opportunity for people to see what can be done. It is a public road. So one of the things when I met with Tom and with Tampa Bay is that, hey, we're going to have some kind of, it's a walking street, by the way, and bikers go through all the time.
but an opportunity, it's almost like a park for people to read and see, hey, these are options. These are other things that you can do to help improve the environment and protect your health. Thank you.
I just want to add one thing.
Yeah.
Two things. One is we do different things and you follow the contract, and even these plans, they go, well, we're not using no plan,
Yeah.
we're just putting this flat walls. Right, I didn't realize that, so we have to educate the marine contractors. And say, look, you can do your flat walls in some spots, but here's other 2 or 3 other designs that you could be selling. Right, I think that's really important, and also funding, right, there's the DEP phase funding, there's new funding that's going to cities, so they can, for the public areas, get low interest loans that can also go to the residents. So we can help make it easier for residents as far as pay for it, and get the marine contractors to know that there are other ways to do it, and I think can make some big strides. I'm sorry.
No, so I want to add to what Tom was just saying, because marine contractors, like we just got this set of plans, right? That it's the living shoreline option, right? So we got these that are movable. Contractors do the same thing. They work with their own engineers to create their own plans, but they're not the plans that we've created. You know, they actually have a set themselves that they can transfer to the next property, and then they work in conjunction with engineers. So a couple of other contractors that came to look at our plans did say the same thing. No, we're not going to do that. We have this, because they're already working with an engineer. So it's a business, right? So you already have the person you're paying for their plans. You're not going to let go of your partner, right? So they're not going to use our plans, because then their partner wouldn't be very happy if they're losing their business. So there has to be, I would wish those engineers that do the plans for their contractors would be giving residents these other options. And if there's
Any questions? No, that was very interesting. Thank you.
Thanks.
So we're going to go on to information items, and do you have any reports or staff reports?
Yeah, just a couple of highlights. Let me get the other screen. So I just wanted to mention, we're just awaiting one more signature page from partners for the interlocal agreement update. So once we receive that, and I'm hoping to get that actually by today, we'll go ahead and file that within each of the 4 county governments, and then send that back as a fully executed agreement, hopefully before the start of the next fiscal year, which will begin October 1. But all good on that front. Appreciate everyone's support of the program and the third amended and restated interlocal agreement update. Recognize that there's a lot of uncertainty in the future in terms of funding, but your continued support of the program is very much appreciated and welcomed. And along that front, I know, moving through this fall and into next year, the local funding situation is still sort of uncertain. But I did want to highlight that we have had some really good bipartisan support in Congress. We actually do have some bills in play that will continue to authorize the National Ocean programs and level fund us over the next, hopefully, federal budget year. The authorization for the National Program is proposed to be extended through 2031. So we're hoping those bills are fully approved through Congress. There's still actually some hurdles to go through before the close of this congressional cycle and the elections in November. But just wanted to raise that attention that the budget we just passed was heavy on that sort of federal support that we have received in the past, and that looks to be like it's going to continue at least into the next fiscal year. So I just want to bring that to your attention. Also want to highlight we have a couple opportunities for community-based grants. Jessica manages our Bay Mini Grant program. We're calling for proposals through September 16th. This year, we're funding projects up to about the $10,000 level. So if you know of any community partners, nonprofits, homeowners like we just heard that might be interested in implementing some of these novel techniques, that's the grant program to look forward to. Blake, did you want to talk about the community survey and give the shout out to participation there too.
Yeah, so some of you may remember 2 years ago we started what we call the Tampa Bay Community Survey, and so this is our primary tool for collecting consistent long-term information that can feed into some of the state of the Bay. So it runs every 2 years. We collect information about the community's priorities for their community, environmental, economic, infrastructure, all types of things. They're changing attitudes about the state of the environment, some of the behaviors that they do, so we can track progress on things like fertilizing during the summer and other sorts of things like that to help us with some of our behavior change campaigns, as well as their knowledge about the state of the Bay and different things like that. So the 2026 wave has just opened up and it'll be open until October 1st. We already have over 1,000 people that have taken it, but if you want to make sure that your community's voices don't get trumped by people from other communities, make sure that you spread that survey out to folks in your community so that their input can be in there. You can find it on our website. It's on one of the banners on our front page, or if you just Google Tampa Bay Community Survey, it'll be the first thing.
Like, I just want to highlight that every year we usually seek a resolution through Congress designating a week in September, National Estuaries Week, and this year it'll be September 19th through 26th. Sheila's been organizing a event at the Bishop Museum to kind of highlight some of the wins we've had within the region in terms of environmental success stories. So if you're able to participate, that's going to be September 24th. And then we're also going to have a large marine debris derby that we've been organizing now for, this is the fourth year, right? Fourth year. That's going to be on September 26th at E.G. Simmons Park. We welcome you all to participate there, formulate a team, and you have a chance to win some really great prizes. Anything from power poles to coolers of beverages that you might like to enjoy on the weekends. So it's basically a tournament for the most trash collected by pounds, usually are the winner. And you get a variety of different raffle tickets based on the type of trash you're bringing in from the environment during the cleanup. And that those tickets are used for the raffles and the giveaways we have at the event. I don't know if you want to add anything else.
This is like our biggest cleanup event that we have every year. We have usually anywhere from 150 to 200 people participating. So it's really loved by the community. We tend to reach kind of folks that are a little bit outside the choir. So we get a lot of anglers participating. And that's just it showcases the value of this public-private partnership that we continue to grow. That's really good. Yeah. Bring in some tires from the tire rig. So that shows that the tires are able to be lifted off the ground by all of the divers. So we're not sorry. No, but I have a hand on the spot. Yeah.
You have just general updates of the technical advisory committee as well as the community advisory committee, all the publications, meetings, and events that we've been holding over the past quarter in the packet as well. And then Maya has
Next board meeting is November 20th. It'll be at Porter Creek Preserve in northern Pinellas County to continue our tour of the watershed.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything to add to the group? No? Okay, seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. Good to see you all.
Thank you.
thank you guys for making the trip down to Nancy.
Making it to